Welcome to Developing the Leader Within podcast, the podcast that brings you leadership insights from the brightest minds shaping our world. Join us as we dive into conversation with trailblazers, innovators, and change makers, spanning every corner of the globe. Get ready to explore new perspectives, gain actionable insights, and become the leader the world needs today. Unleash your potential. Tune into Developing the Leader Within podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Let's embark on this transformative journey together. Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you have not subscribed, please do so now, as it will help us getting our show to others and help us get to our next milestone. Today, we are speaking with Yared Oliveros. Yared is the program ambassador lead for Latinas Rising Up in HR. She served as president of Global Latinos at Tesla, ERG, and staff diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. She is an author in Latinas Rising Up in HR and fellow co-author in the Latino Leadership Playbook. Yared, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited about having this conversation. Earlier, we were talking about the unnervousness that I have, or the nervousness that I have around this particular topic. And folks, will be speaking about leading the way, transforming diversity, equity, and inclusion in 2025. But before we get into that conversation, Yared, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Gosh, I'm a first generation Mexican American. I was raised in Los Angeles, specifically in the city of Inglewood. It's been a journey to get to where we are here today. Definitely coming from immigrant parents into this country, right? Seeing all the adversity that they had to go through as a family has definitely been a learning and a continuous learning at that. I went ahead and furthered my education at Mount St. Mary's University, where I received and earned my bachelor's, and then I attended the University of Phoenix, where I also earned my master's degree. And through this process of education, that's kind of where I started seeing a lot of the opportunities of where do we help mi gente, where do we help our people. And I was involved in various organizations that, eventually at the core, I knew was how do we help other people, other folks to reach those capacities, to bring their best version of themselves, develop their skill sets along the way in various roles. And as I was navigating my corporate career experience, I was able to land some pretty amazing roles that helped me and allowed me to do just that. So, from a corporate experience standpoint, I started in hospitality at the Hilton. Then I moved on to working at Nestle, where a pretty large, big food and beverage company where I worked in recruiting. That's kind of where I started a lot of the skill sets of developing talent, helping candidates to really come in and bring their best selves to work in their interview process. And then I also took a little bit of a role in our human resources team as an HR business partner in in Southern California. And then I relocated to Northern California, where I started working at Tesla in recruiting. And that's really where a lot of things kind of just came at me at once, where I'm like, wow, there is a lot of work to get done in the recruiting space. And D&I was really more coming up to fruition around this time a little bit more. So in that role with Tesla, I then moved into more of like a diversity recruiting lead. And then I led our diversity, equity, and inclusion team as well. So currently, I'm partnering with our founder, Priscilla Guaso, at Latinas Rising Up in HR, where I'm the program ambassador lead. And really, this has been an eye opening experience for me, as well as I get to manage 15 amazing Latinas at various capacities of their role, whether they're coordinators all the way to CHROs, to help really in the space to see how can we bring those experiences and skill sets to them to be able to really elaborate in their role as HR in the workplace. And currently, I'm a mom of three baby boys. So it's definitely an opportunity for me to also just help them to understand what does it mean to be a leader, what does it mean to be resilient. So I'm really excited to just share the space and a little bit of the knowledge that I have on the DNI side. So thank you again for having me.
Oh, absolutely. And DEI has been a target of many conversations, to say the least. Obviously, a lot of growth around that subject where training has been developed. Folks have been doing conferences and meetings and developing internal structures for companies. And we had been talking earlier about the perspective of many in terms of DEI and how they either support it or don't. A lot of the incoming legislative type of folks have a view that is not as well received. Let's just say that in terms of DEI, and they've approached it in a derogatory way. And so my nervousness around this next 4 years, especially in our country here in the US, is how is this going to affect all the efforts that have been going on for the last 4 years plus, because it's something that has been working up to it. How is that going to affect us now? And so, talking about the landscape of what we'll be going into, how has the landscape of DEI evolved in the recent years since you've been involved? And what trends do you see shaping its future, for 25 and beyond?
Yeah. DEI has definitely been part of our landscape for years. It's definitely evolved a lot from celebrating historic and cultural months, right, to really now truly educating organizations on really a variety of topics. And you mentioned it earlier, the trainings, and these are trainings around unconscious bias. What is intersectionality? What is equity versus equality? And so much more. So a lot of this evolvement has increased, and when it comes and a lot of it too in the recent years, especially when we talk about social justice challenges, right? The shift in values and social responsibility. So we've kind of seen a lot of this growth happening more and more. Now, when it comes to the future, AI now is a very big piece that is going to also is going to take a big toll and a big place when it comes to DNI. And I'm looking at this from a positive lens. There are obviously the negative side of things of where like this is a DNI hire. Why are we hiring this person only based on race and gender? But I always want to look at it on a positive side. And when I was in leading our DNI team, that was really my focus when I was talking to leaders, when I was talking to just even my own colleagues. It's how do we look at this in a positive way, right? How do we help our people, or whether it's regardless of race, gender, whatever the case may be, how do we help them actually elevate their skill set? Not so much we're going to hire you because you're a woman or you're this, right? Like, what are some of the skill sets that you're going to bring? And I think that was something that I really took pride in when I was in my role, is really giving our folks the opportunity to say, like, hey, just because you're Latino, as an example, doesn't mean that we're going to promote you. But show me, where have you been able to really shine for us to be able to provide you with such great opportunities, right? And I think that also got them thinking of like, maybe I do need to change X, Y, and Z, or maybe I do need to elevate this particular skill set of mine, right? So that was something that was really one of my main focuses when I was in this space of how do we elevate your skill set versus just only focusing on you because of this particular race or gender or any other attribute that you may have. So when we think about the future of what's coming, both on like the social piece, there is going to be a lot of there's going to hopefully be more folks that are still standing up and saying, hey, I want to be a representative and be that consultant when it comes to the DNI space, to be able to still bring some insight. Because you're right, there are some folks that are kind of very narrow minded. They don't know, they don't want to know, they don't understand it, and it's a very uncomfortable topic to discuss. However, how do we then bring that positivity to be able to say, all right, listen, we have an opportunity here. How can we even just improve when it comes to the hiring, the performance piece? How do we identify some biases? So I brought up the AI piece, which I think again is going to be part of what we do in our workplace when it comes to DNI. So some of the positive potentials that I see is when we're looking at the employee life cycle, this is going to definitely improve on hiring and performance management processes, identifying the patterns of discrimination. So if we can actually have some of these things in place, that is going to be already game changing. It can always, this also AI piece can also help with the recruiting process, right? Of onboarding, pipeline management, the employee experience and engagement. So again, this is something that I'm really excited about because this is not something that we've done as much in the past. Now, granted, some companies or organizations may just started. Some may not even know that this is part of what they could potentially do. But I think this is something that we can definitely see evolve when it comes to 2025 and beyond in this space.
Great insight there. And from the leader's perspective, I love the what can we do, right? That's the approach that leaders should start taking and should always take, if you ask me, when you're approached with something different than what you've been doing. Right? So, okay, you get something, some initiative. Okay, so how can I help? How
Yeah.
can I influence this? How can I put this into play, which puts people in a better footing than just taking an approach at ahí hay otra cosa más, right? There goes another thing we have to implement and shove down our throats. It's very important for leaders to take a strategic stance and approach at all the things that will come their way in 2025. And talking about strategies, what strategies have you found most effective in creating an inclusive workplace culture that goes beyond compliance and fosters genuine belonging?
Yes, thank you. I love this question. You know, having DEI integrated in the employee life cycle, I mentioned this and I can't seem to stress it enough. This is the key, right? Because this employee life cycle part is really you're implementing best practices of inclusion from the moment a candidate is applying to being interviewed, to the hiring, to the onboarding, to the performance conversations, to compensations, to promotions, even at the point of exit. Like, what are we doing or what practices are being placed in when it's going to eventually hit the bottom line of an organization? And I think that's one correlation that sometimes is missed is by me implementing these practices, how does this impact the bottom line? How does the value of my organization go up, right? So a couple of things that I've found and I've done in the past in my work has been reviewing data on a quarterly basis. That is really key, right? We cannot tell a story and we cannot implement action plans if there is no data. And this can be data from employee engagement surveys, from exit surveys, from candidate surveys if folks are applying to specific roles. Being able to collect that quantitative and qualitative data is also important because that allows us to create these action plans based on what that data is showing us. And then this again can help us in really kind of comparing what does attrition look like, what does promotion look like, compensation. And the other key thing is also involving key and influential key stakeholders. That is also going to be important because if we're here just kind of hablando, just talking and putting things out there, and no one's really taking accountability or the initiative to do it, ahí se va a quedar, right? Everything's going to stay there. There's not going to be much change. But those are some key kind of things that is important to be able to continue to diversify the workforce. And it's going to continue to grow and evolve. Our society is growing and evolving. So this is definitely going to be a really big piece of kind of creating those specific strategies to be able to tell a story, to make sure that you're not just compliant, but you're also really creating a space of belonging along the way. And there's one thing I always say: it's we can't manage how people feel, right? We can create an environment, we can create that space. At the end of the day, the individual is going to be the only one that can really experience if they belong or not, right? So I often say, don't put so much the pressure of thinking I got to do this because I want them to belong. It's really an individual choice of whether or not they belong. As an individual, you're really creating the culture, you're creating the space for an individual to really feel like, you know what, I'm here at the right place at the right time. This company, this organization cares about me. I've seen that they've put some work in. I see how it also impacts the bottom line, right? So how are we being also transparent with our people, with our employees along the way is also key.
A key indeed. Now, DEI for some companies was an external influence, right? They didn't start with the DEI mindset. That's not how they develop their culture. And so, for many, the culture influences are external. And sometimes that's hard to adopt, especially when they're saying, no, this is the topic of the time and you got to get in line and yada, yada, yada. And so it
Mhm.
becomes abrasive at times. But there are ways that leaders can facilitate making this less as abrasive as they can. So, how can leaders ensure that DEI initiatives are integrated into the core of their organization or, let's say, strategies rather than being treated as a standalone effort?
Great question. And I think that's kind of unfortunately how it's been happening in many cases. But I've also seen how a lot of companies have evolved in this space. And a lot of it really comes from the buy in from leadership. It has to be part of your business model, right? I talk again about the employee life cycle. It has to be part of your everyday business model. There has to be metrics around it, right? Just like every company or business has KPIs. What is that KPI for DNI? Granted, there are some things that can be measured and some cannot, but how do we again integrated into that business piece? The other option is, obtaining success stories from employees, from individuals. What are those success stories? How can you continue to inspire others within that same space? Have those reasonable, actionable plans, right? Not too overwhelming. I remember, at one point I would create like these elaborate action plans, and the leaders are looking at me like, why are we doing so much? Like, this is, and I had to take a step back and say, you know what, this is a lot. Does it make sense right now? Do we have to focus on this particular topic? Probably not, right? So I also had to scale back my way of being able to approach the conversation and being able to say, listen, this conversation right now, or this topic or this theme is really important because this is going to be how it turns back to time, back to the business. We need to have these conversations. There needs to be accountability. And honestly, that was like the hard part sometimes. It was, we could put all these elaborate plans, but there was no accountability at the end of the day. And then there were some cases that, I did have some great leaders that said, yeah, let's do this. And I started seeing some changes happening along the way. So how do we integrate DNI is really kind of making it part of that business model. That is where we're going to start seeing these kind of efforts along the way. It's not going to be, from the noche a la mañana, right? But it is going to be some time where we will see some progress along the way. And yes, there is going to be certain things that are going to be happening in our social, in the society that we live, and we will have to pivot. We will have to be able to have those conversations with our employees. And I want to encourage our leaders, our people managers, to not be afraid to have those conversations. Sometimes they just need a space to have a conversation in, to just talk about how they're feeling. Sometimes there's no need to take action about it. It's just really giving folks a space to just say, like, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? And if there's something that the company organization can do to help mitigate it, or can help, provide a little bit of a solution, that in itself is already a success. But just allowing that space to folks to have those conversations, I think, is definitely key.
And you mentioned some of the challenges that are existing from the implementation side, both from the leader and from those that are driving the initiatives, right? Because we can get overly excited. We call it
Yes.
zealous at times,
Yes.
and like overfeed the initiative, and then it drowns the people out. They get weary. And so you have to know how to implement this within the environment that you have. So love those advices and tips there. Talking about challenges, what are some common challenges leaders face in implementing DEI initiatives, and how can they overcome them to drive meaningful change?
Yeah. You probably have heard this before, and I know I've definitely had a lot of conversations with my other DNI partners in this space. And a lot of it could also just be the lack of support, right? The lack of even resources, the lack of communication, resistance to change. There's no clear vision. And I've encountered some of these in the past in previous roles, but I've also seen the importance of having strong leaders to be able to have those measurable outcomes. So I think one of the main thing is telling the story and using that data, right? Data is always going to be important, because it definitely allows us to say, hey, this is where we are, this is where we want to go. And again, how does this tie back to your business? How does this tie back to the bottom line? And essentially every that is a key thing too, right? I think we get so caught up on, like, we have to do this DNI, work. But at the end of the day, is how does this drive meaningful change at the end of the day, right? So I would definitely say those are some of the common challenges: is the leadership, communications, the resistance to change, maybe not enough good trainings. And I'm all about the trainings, but I also think it's important to have those real life scenarios, right? Because anyone can just kind of go through training and check the box and take a quiz. But at the end of the day, it's how are we actually showing these real life scenarios? How are we actually telling these stories to people managers, to leaders, so that they can also see that that there is an importance and that there is a need. So those are some of the ways that I've been able to kind of see that I've been experienced those challenges before, and I'm also been able to go above and beyond is creating that type of action item, to your point, not to be overbearing, not to be overwhelming, but just focus on two or three things that really tie back to the business, that is part of kind of that employee life cycle, and that we're slowly measuring it along the way, and that there's accountability. I cannot stress that enough. Accountability is certainly the key. Otherwise, it's going to fall through the wayside and it's not going to be as important as it should be.
Absolutely. And I've seen that in effect in many companies that I've been able to speak to where the accountability wasn't there and there it went, right? So, you have to think about how you're implementing all of these things. And you also have to think about how good or not so good it may be for your company because you have to treat the people that are there currently, but you have to be wise enough as a leader to know which part of the DEI, you could say SWOT, is
Hmm.
appropriate for you at the time that you're implementing. You mentioned data, data, data. Hey, is it part of your business plan? I know if it's not part of the business plan, it's not going to get too much say at the end of the day. But metrics do play and accountability, as you mentioned. So, in what ways can leaders measure the success of their DEI efforts and how can they ensure continuous improvement? You mentioned the training, but we always have to improve.
Right. We do have to improve. One of the things, it's setting those measurable goals, right? But one thing that I've seen or not seen enough of is having a seat at the table with the HR leadership, the executive team, the folks that are having these discussions at these roundtables. Um, you know, Sometimes it could be that as D&I consultants, we can come in and we can provide these action plans. But if we don't have a seat at the table, or we're counting on someone to speak on our behalf, it may not actually one, the messaging may not come across as how you want it to be. Two, it may kind of go through the wayside. So I think one of the main things is to have that seat at the table in those conversations with the leadership team, to discuss goals, to discuss the metrics, the results, the action plans. um, the other part too is that, that can be done is creating programs that help individuals succeed in these spaces, whether it's mentorship programs, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's education programs, right? Like there's a lot of low hanging fruit that's available that can actually be done to be able to create these measures. I'm all about creating the surveys, the quantitative surveys as well, sitting at the roundtables. I mean, I remember spending hours just sitting with employees and just having conversations with them, like, let me know what is a need, what are you fearful of, what are you want to look at a little bit more, right? And really digesting this information and having these group discussions and creating plans around it. I think those are some key things that are really important to be able to see how can I measure the success, because it's going to be different for every company. So again, I would just also say too, like, leverage the employee resource groups. That is such a big component of what we are able to accomplish in partnership with the business. So how do these employee resource groups also help the bottom line, right? They also have a lot of these great ideas to be able to diversify the product, the service, the engagement piece. So these are also some of the things that folks can actually take a look at when it comes to measuring success in their D&I efforts.
Wonderful, wonderful advice there. And I hope that all the leaders that in the DEI space are listening to this and taking notes. Yeah, that you shared so many tips and so much good advice. And I know that we mentioned earlier you were in books, right? So, what do you have coming up? Where can the viewer list or the listener follow you or support you? And where can we find your books?
Thank you so much. So, yes, volume two co-author for Latinas Rising Up in HR. That is obviously available in Amazon. And then, of course, you and I have co-authored our other amazing book as well, the Latino Leadership Playbook, which is also available on Amazon. One of the things that I'm really excited about coming up, I'm going to be conducting and hosting a great conversation around AI in HR, right? So disrupting it, what does that mean? So that'll be coming up very soon, and you can find that on LinkedIn as well. So one of the things we're trying to do is really within this Latinas Rising Up in HR piece is really elevating our skill sets, really elevating our folks to be able to see I can have more additional tools to be able to provide to my leaders, right? So being part of this community has been fantastic because we are touching really a lot of topics that come from, mitigating risk, AI, DEI, increasing a business results through our people. So it's been such a wonderful time just to be able to spend a great opportunity with Priscilla and really rising up the space. So if you can follow us on LinkedIn, Latinas Rising Up in HR, and also, you can follow me as well on LinkedIn as well. We have amazing things coming up next year in 2025 where we have some virtual events. We also have some in-person events. We have folks really represented about 7 major cities across the country. And then hopefully, God willing, we'll be expanding to Latin America next year. So we're really excited on all the great work that's going to be coming up.
Outstanding. Well, folks, we'll have all the links on the video and the show notes for you to get a hold of Yared and all she's doing, and also her links to her social so you can follow and support her in her efforts. Now, we want to remind everybody that today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, The Outlier Project, and Duco. And if you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment. We're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.